I feel like one big trauma response that women especially have is like people pleasing and, catering to others, because we feel like when we're going out doing everything for everyone, especially when we're in that real maternal state of pregnancy and postpartum, it's like you almost lose yourself.
Hello and welcome to Healing Trauma Mamas. I'm your host, Madon Wingo. Thank you for joining us as we share in our stories and experiences of healing from childhood traumas and birth traumas. Listen as we discuss our struggles, our failures, our strengths and our victories, and all those lessons we've learned along the way. Hello, Healing Trauma Mamas listeners. Thanks for joining us again today. I get to have a special guest, Shelby, with me. Shelby, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I live here in Texas in Sweetwater, where you are also located, as you know. I have been a pharmacy technician for 11 years since I got out of high school, and I'm a new birth worker. I trained for my doula certification a year ago, and I'm also a birth photographer. So I'm just finally really starting to get the ball rolling on that. And I'm a mom of two little girls, Jovi and Jade, who are 10 and 6. And my other half, Christian, we've been together for 4 years now.
Nice.
So, yeah. So I'm transitioning from the medical field in one side to the more holistic side where I feel like I kind of belong.
Well, that's a pretty big jump, I would say.
Huge. It's huge. Yeah.
Yeah. Pharmacy tech to doula and birth photographer. And that's a big leap. So that's pretty awesome.
It's a whole lifestyle change. Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit about how this whole thing started. Would you like to start with your births or wherever you feel like
yeah, I can do that. My first birth obviously was when I was 19, with Jovi. That pregnancy, I was pretty ignorant. I was 19 and pregnant and thought, unicorns and rainbows and butterflies were, everything's going to be perfect. At about, it was like I was induced early, like at 39 weeks, which I say early, just because I know with what I know now, knowing that I was a first time mom, 39 weeks with an unfavorable cervix. Now I know that's early. And so it took 2.5 days. I think it ended up 42 hours of labor from the time we started the induction process, which was long and tiring and exhausting. And then it finally settled in when they told me it was time to push. I was like, something snapped. Like, I froze. I looked at my mom and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do this. I can't do this. She's like, you are 9 months too late, honey. You have to do this. I'm like, oh, okay. And it, everything was fine, like immediately postpartum, but like the hours after and maybe the day after, I started to struggle really bad with emotions and just like self-doubt. And I just didn't trust myself. I didn't know that then, but I can see now that I was like, what do I do with this thing? I didn't know I could do it. And then 4 years later, after some struggles with infertility and a miscarriage, we ended up with Jade, which that pregnancy was a lot harder because of the miscarriage and the infertility, just because all of that was just kind of lingering over me still. The loss was just 6 weeks before I got pregnant with her.
Oh, wow.
So I didn't even really, I don't know, I didn't even fully process that before it was time to be pregnant again. And then I was sick the entire time. I was so sick. And
Oh.
I think honestly, a lot of it was stress. Like,
Mhm.
because even to this date, stress will make me like dry heave in the morning.
Oh.
But it was just all day sickness all the time. I, I, it sucked, but I got Jade. But delivery, I was determined to have like a different situation. I didn't want the epidural.
Mhm.
I wanted to do it myself. I wanted to bring my birth ball. Um, in hindsight, I would have hired a doula,
Yeah.
um, or just had a home birth. But um, it really wasn't bad until about 5 centimeters or so. Once I really started getting into active labor, because at that point I had one nurse who was very pushy about, oh well, you're getting into pain, you look so uncomfortable, why don't we just give you something very, she was just against my wishes, and then that self-doubt started coming back in. And then I really just spent the whole rest of the time in bed because they really wanted me on a monitor for I didn't ask back then, but now I know it was for no reason other than
Mhm.
it was easier for them. um and really, I think the worst part was just pushing because I was on my tailbone for most of labor, which when I went to push, I could feel that something was not right with my tailbone. And that's when it broke.
Oh,
And
yeah,
the
that
doctor
stinks.
was also very rough with his final check, and he was really trying to count me down, you know. He's like, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 or whatever. He gets to 10 and he realizes I'm not stopping. It's like, you're not running the
Mhm.
show, sir. But I don't think he meant harm. I think, but just I don't know. The way you feel supported in your birth environment is so important, and I know that now. And I wish I just had known what I know now and would have just taken more control and trusted myself
Yeah,
a little better.
hindsight gets us, doesn't it?
Doesn't it?
Yeah,
but
for
no,
sure.
but no, I really can still look back and appreciate the bursts for what they were, though, because even this week, just going to two cesareans on the same day, within hours of each other, which I wasn't at the cesarean, but I was a backup. And it's just sometimes, birth doesn't go the way that as a doula you really, really anticipate or want it to go for everyone.
Mhm.
And it's like being able to let go of that, and know that just because it's not the most natural way or the most planned way or whatever
Mhm.
your stipulations are, it can still
So,
be okay.
so what led you to the jump? Because that's a pretty big jump.
You,
I
you.
didn't think that was it. I thought there was some other stuff.
I mean, I always wanted to do birth work, like I never, I don't know, I never accepted that it's what I wanted to do, because in my head it was like you have to go to nursing school and be a labor and delivery nurse, or you have to go to OBGYN school and do OB, or you have to become a midwife. And then you kind of were like, oh, well, what about just becoming a doula and seeing how that is? And I was like, what? Uh, a what? So when I looked more into that and kind of also considered that I really love photography, but when I was doing photography, like I didn't exactly know what I wanted to do with it, right?
Mhm.
So once I realized that the doula and the birth photography together were kind of exactly what I could do and what I was really drawn to do, forever. Just anytime I've had a friend or a family member that's pregnant, I could talk their ears off for days about pregnancy and birth and labor and all of it. And I've been obsessed with baby stories since I was a child. So
Mhm. So you started out way well before I mentioned you becoming a doula.
yeah, I guess so. But deciding to take the jump was a lot to do with you. Just why don't you just get certified to be a doula and see what happens? And it's just like, okay, well, maybe. And then I really started looking into it. I even looked into some midwifery programs and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but I was like, yeah, this doula thing really, really seems to be really my I don't know what the word would be right now. It's so late.
Your cup of tea.
Yes, that's my cup of tea.
Well, that's great. I'm curious in because the doula training the certification I finally did after years of being a doula without being certified, I decided to get certified and see if that would help to be able to help in our community a little bit more. And I was the only one in our community here.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I'm not a doula anymore, as far as I know, you're the only one in
I
our
think I am the
community.
only one in Sweetwater. Yeah.
Yep. So in your training, did they give you any type of training on being trauma informed?
Absolutely. That's one thing I really loved about my training is that my trainer is not. So Amy Gilliland, she has a program, Doulaing the Doula. I absolutely loved it. She is brilliant. She has a PhD and just her entire thing was on her dissertation was on doulas. Like like the whole thing. It's
Awesome.
she is so smart and one of her biggest things was trauma and birth and how they relate, how birth trauma is a thing, but how also previous trauma can relate in birth or like affect your birth. And
Hmm.
she was really, really good about that. And it's a real passion of hers. And
That's
I love the whole trauma informed stuff too. So I like to really know what I'm looking at and what I need to look for. I've been trained since I got my started my training in October
last
of
year.
last year.
Yeah.
Um, I can't technically be certified until I send in like 6 birth stories
Right.
and get like a whole bunch of different things. Like I have to get doctors or nurses or midwives or other birth team members to sign forms
Hmm.
and all that jazz. And I did not even bring those to the births that I went to last week. But anyways, about a year
Yeah,
since my training.
that's great that they require that because there are some schools that it's just, just do these things and here you're a certified doula. But if you've not had any actual experience,
Yes.
that makes a big difference, as I'm sure you've learned. And so, kind of like in midwifery school, it'd be crazy if I just went and did all the academics and then I became a certified midwife, but I never actually,
Yeah,
you
you just
know,
show up to your
had my
first birth like,
hands
hey,
on
I'm
that.
here.
Yeah,
I couldn't
exactly.
imagine.
So you got to have the hands-on experience to go with it. So I'm glad that you've been able to work on that right now.
I do have a client who I think might be having um she's having a lot of emotional issues
Mhm.
and she's got some mama problems and she's in a lot of pain and just is not going into labor.
Mm.
And so I don't know, at this point I just try to make my part like, hey, okay, like you need to do these meditations if you can. And, if you're having some heavy feelings, you need to release them and allow yourself to feel them out. And, just honor yourself at this time and don't forget to take care of yourself.
Hello, Healing Trauma Mamas listeners. I wanted to pause the podcast just for a moment to let you know about the platform that I've been using to create this podcast, Anchor by Spotify. Anchor has been so easy for me to use. As you all know, I've said many times that I'm a very unlikely podcast host. In fact, I never thought I'd be on a podcast, let alone hosting one myself. But when my daughter showed me Anchor last spring, I realized how easy it was for me to be able to create content and upload it to many different platforms using Anchor. I'm so thankful I got started, and I'm extremely thankful it's completely free. So I think that every single person has something valuable to share with the world. You listening right now have something valuable to share, and all you have to do is download the Anchor app and start your own podcast today. Let me know when you do, and I look forward to listening to it. Okay, back to the podcast. Ways that you come alongside your clients to help them if they've had trauma in the past, and ways that you help during the pregnancy, and then through the birth, and then postpartum, like you talked about, some processing happening and all of that. Just kind of maybe some tips, some tools that they give you to help.
So my favorite tool, honestly, is my birth photography.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is like the number one thing we can do to help people process their births. I do like to keep in, like, if anything sensitive happens, I do a lot of like prenatal training on like being okay with a change in outcomes. And if you have to abort your birth plan, learning how to be flexible but still hold your ground. Boundaries training, I've learned, is like number one when it comes to preventing birth trauma, at least. Because the birth trauma really has more to do with how you integrate your experience than it does with the experience itself. So if I can go through these birth photos with them and show, and they can kind of relive the process, I take out all the scary nitty gritty stuff that might be a trigger. That all goes in a separate folder. They get to decide when or if they even want to see those. Mm-hmm. So if there was, say, a situation where, there's an emergency cesarean and I took pictures anyway, but mom's having a really hard time and I can kind of tell she doesn't want to talk about it, or she gets kind of weepy every time you bring up her birth, you just look out for those. It's just, you have to watch these mamas, and they'll tell you in their body language and in their emotions what's going on. Mm-hmm. You just have to be willing to hold open that space and be really non-judgmental and figure out what they need.
So this is interesting, using the birth photography to really help process. I love this idea.
Mm-hmm. I think it's great.
Walk us through a little bit more what that would look like for a mama. Say she had maybe her birth went okay, but she's having trouble deal with a few aspects of the birth. Maybe she had to get transferred, or maybe she got an epidural when she didn't want to do that. How, I know those are more minor traumas that happen, but I think those things are found, they happen more often than they sound minor, but in our heads, or in women's heads afterwards, they're very big to them. So how would you go about using your photography to help with that?
It's really about the way you paint their story to them. If you, especially the music, I feel like if you can give them a slideshow, put it to music, and really go through the story, showing the points. It's about showing them their strength. It's about showing them that they were resilient, that they faced adversity, but that they still honored what they needed in the moment and got a good outcome, which is healthy mom and healthy baby. Hopefully that's the outcome in all of them. Birth is unpredictable, but it's in a situation like that with teeny tiny traumas. I mean, I feel like it's more about talking it out than anything. The pictures could, I don't know, to me, it just paints the story for them in a way where they're not so focused on those moments. They're more focused on the journey that they took.
It does happen. Well, sometimes we do get hyper focused on one specific detail of a birth. In fact, that happens a lot in traumas. You get hyper focused on one specific aspect instead of looking at the whole. And usually it's one thing that you felt like you did wrong or went wrong when you're not looking at all the rest of the things that you did so well. And
Yes.
and I know that can make a big difference to just trying to show a mom all these wonderful things that she did, how strong she was and brave, and how much fortitude she had, getting through and empowering her in this process, and then trying to help her process and realize that thing that she's hyper focused on, while it is still important, because I don't want to gloss over that to her that was very traumatic or very important, but it helps to reframe our line of thinking around the birth or around whatever the trauma was.
Yeah. Like, although this isn't how you wanted it to go, although this intervention happened and you weren't pleased with it, let's look at this in a different perspective and see if we can find that bright side of things and show you where you really didn't do anything wrong. You didn't make a bad choice. You just, and even if you aren't happy with, and that's another thing is I feel like if mothers aren't happy with their birth experience, aren't happy with being a mother, aren't happy with the postpartum period, aren't happy with breastfeeding, they beat themselves up about it ultimately. And I feel like that just multiplies and might even manifest the trauma somehow. I obviously it's just a thought, but like we really are so hard on ourselves that alone is traumatic because it's just like I'm not good enough. I can't do it. That self-doubt, which I guess is also a trauma response because you're just trying to, yeah.
So then
just trying to do the best.
So a lot of that then is helping a mom if you're coming alongside them. And I know as somebody who's came through trauma herself, and things that you learn how to do is countering the lies. So taking those things that are complete lies, but that we've been we've been believing, that we've decided that, it's the truth, even though it's not, because we've repeated it to ourselves so many times. But then taking that and recognizing, hey, this is a lie. This is not the truth. So what is the truth? Let's say the truth. And every time that lie starts to come at you, then you stop and you counter it.
Yes. And I that makes me think of just therapy in general. I love to use the stuff I learn in my own personal therapy and stuff and just kind of give it to my clients when I can tell they need it. And it's just little things like that. Like you're saying, like, oh, you're having these negative thoughts. Well, let's reframe those thoughts. Let's take these negative things and combat it with things that we know tell us that it's not true. You think this, it's a lie though, because you have evidence of it being a lie. You think you're a terrible mom. You cooked for your kids today. You gave them hugs and they told you I love you. Are you a bad mom? No, you just feel like a bad mom. And that feeling is coming from, let's dig into that,
Yeah. Finding the source of where you're getting that feeling from is absolutely important.
Yes.
But just that, we get into habits. I think that happens too. And that's why I think processing after a birth, as soon as the mom's able, I mean, obviously we're not talking immediately postpartum, but once she's able to kind of talk about it a little bit, I think the sooner the better to talk about it and start processing. That way you don't get trapped into that negative line of thinking.
Yeah. I know I like to set up my postpartums within the first 2 to 3 weeks. What do you usually do as far as?
Yeah, I think that's a good time frame. To usually, give a week or two to really kind of let them think about it and process it for a bit. And then usually between that 2 to 4 week time period, then we're having some good conversations about, hey, how do you feel like the birth went? And I always try to make sure that I don't impart the way I believe the birth went to them, because
so important.
Yeah, I find a lot of times if we do that, then we shut down what they may be thinking. So, and I know this from my personal experience that, I was feeling really, really frustrated and really rough about birth, about my last birth. And then when I asked a close one, like they mentioned something about it, they're like, oh, it was so amazing, and oh, it was this, and it was all these beautiful, wonderful things. And I just stared at them like, oh, I can't speak now. Because that is
Mm-hmm.
the opposite of what I feel like happened and what's in my mind. So I've tried to use my personal experience on that to be like, okay, I am not going to come to sit down with a mom and be like, your birth was amazing, your birth was beautiful, it looks like such a breeze for you.
Mm-hmm.
Because she may not even, I have no clue what her head space is at that time. And if she's thinking anything different than that, well, then now she has to counter what I've just said.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want her to have to do that. I want to be able to
Yeah.
sit and listen. So I find it's really, really important that when we have these conversations and we talk about, hey, how do you feel your birth went? That I just pause and just listen and don't impart what I think at all first. I've even had a mom approach me and be like, and this was almost a year later. I was a student midwife at her birth, so I wasn't her doula and I wasn't her full-blown midwife. And I didn't have a conversation with her afterwards really about how the birth went. I remember the midwife having a little bit and it just like, and she was struggling slightly, but that was it. But a year later, she contacted me and she's like, hey, could you tell me my birth story? I want to hear from you. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. And I said,
Oh, yeah.
because I said, I don't want to tell you what your birth was. I want you to, my viewpoint is going to be so different than your viewpoint. And I don't want you to feel like your viewpoint is wrong.
Yeah.
And
I get that.
yeah.
See, and that her little request that just kind of is where I'm like, see, that's where my birth photography comes in, because it's like, okay, let's sit down and I want to hear you talk about your birth. I want to know if there's anything before I show you these pictures I don't need to show you. And then we're going to walk through your birth again. And then they kind of get the outsider perspective of it. And it's awesome.
yeah, that's great. Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
glad you have that to help moms. That sounds awesome.
Yeah. Yes. So that's really cool. So I'm glad that makes me feel like I'm doing something right by listening to their story first before I
Absolutely.
show them my birth story perspective.
Yeah, I think
And that
that's
just kind of makes it more important to me to do that first.
yep. Yep, I'm right there with you. Definitely. Well, is there anything that you'd like to share with the listeners about, encouragement for them at where they are at, dealing with healing through the trauma? Because we talk about this often on the podcast. Our focus is not the trauma, our focus is the healing aspect and the working through it
Absolutely.
and the coming out on the other side, with this experience that has grown you and strengthened you and many times turned us into a different person.
Yeah, honestly, just when it comes to anything with trauma, I think it's just important to remember that this is just a reactive state that your body gets in. It's also not something that is rare. So there's plenty of women and moms that have not only know they went through the same thing, but also some that might not know they went through the same thing. So by sharing your story and being open and honest and just accepting your truth and not really being afraid of what people think about it is going to heal you more than, I mean, even years of therapy. Just you have to be straightforward with yourself and don't hold back for anyone. Just
Mm-hmm.
you've got to get through it in the way that is most true to you. And if that means that you're turning down going places because you're not feeling like it, then do that. And I feel like one big trauma response that women especially have is like people pleasing and
Mm-hmm.
catering to others, because we feel like when we're going out doing everything for everyone, especially when we're in that real maternal state of pregnancy and postpartum, it's like you almost lose yourself, and getting back into your body and making sure that you're doing things like exercise and nutrition and taking your showers, and all the little things that when you start to get depressed and your mental health is slipping, all those things are the things you need to make sure you're building into your routine. And you need to ask for help when you need it. There's so much stuff you can do. I honestly could go on about what to do to heal trauma forever, because it's not just like one single thing. It's so many things, but really trusting your intuition and knowing that you can get out of it, and it's not a state that you're stuck in forever.
Exactly.
And not losing hope is the best.
And one of the things that we talk about is, what, something that works really well for me and has helped me tremendously may not work really well for you and help you. We're two very different people. And even if we had the exact same trauma experience, it still may take completely different things for each one of us to help and to heal and work through it. So that's why we try to give so many different types of resources for mamas, because there's a plethora of different ways that might resonate with you for you to be able to heal and come out on the other side a just changed person that has a different perspective than you may have had when you were in the middle of it.
Yeah. There's so many different things, like you said, and not everything works for others, but there are a few things that I do think are worth mentioning. Especially one thing, looking into your attachment style is a huge, like that was one of the biggest factors in me being able to recognize my behaviors and like why they are the way they are. And so even though most stuff is not going to help everyone, that's one thing that I actually think would help everyone, is knowing your attachment style.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
So your attachment style is like basically how you attach to your caregiver or your primary caregivers when you were a child. So securely attached people are not, they're fine on their own, right? I have an anxious preoccupied attachment, which means I am always overthinking and over worrying, and especially when it comes to partners, but just with whoever I'm hyper focused on at that point. And if you know your attachment style, and if it's insecure, getting it back to a secure attachment style, because you have like avoidant. So some people really want to avoid other people. Some people really want to come close to other people. Knowing how you act when you're in different states is a huge, huge help, because when you start to feel a certain way, you can start to predict your behaviors that you might do in response to that feeling, and you can start to combat them before it happens.
Well, it sounds like it's all, understanding yourself.
It's really, that's really all it is. And it's just one tool that I found very helpful in understanding myself, because I knew I was having problems with my attachment, or with just the way I was connecting with people, but especially with my boyfriend. And my therapist, she was just like, look up your attachment styles. And sure enough, he's secure. And I'm like, what? How are you the secure one? But then I got the anxious, preoccupied, insecure attachment. And sure enough, it is the straight up needy girl. The I need you to validate me. And it's all just because of how I was attached or not so attached to my biological mother. And maybe even my mom and dad growing up, which when I say mom, I mean the mom that raised me, but I have a very complicated momhood too. So that's one thing that I've had to work through as a grown up. But now I'm
Yeah,
thankful because I've got three moms in a way.
that's awesome.
And I love it. Yeah, I love it
Yeah. Well,
because they
definitely.
all teach me different lessons.
Yes. Well, and all of our childhoods affect us so much as adults. It's
Yes.
amazing how much this short time span, but because we're growing and learning so much during that time span and imprinting so much on our brains during that time period that affects us the rest of our lives. And
Yes.
recognizing that is important. So we'll make sure and put a link in the show notes to where somebody can go and kind of find out, okay, what's my attachment style? Um, thanks for that resource. Appreciate that.
Yes. You're welcome.
So if there happens to be anyone in the Sweetwater, Abilene area listening and looking for a doula, where can they reach you at?
My website is babybumpbeyond.org. My Instagram handle is at babybump.beyond and or Shelby Linnell Gosher or Baby Bump and Beyond on Facebook.
We'll make sure and give a few different ways for people to contact you if they'd like
All right.
to do that, a
Good
check
deal.
in for either photography or doula services. That'd be awesome.
That sounds good. I do everything from fertility awareness through birth, postpartum. So I'm
Okay.
there for it all.
That's awesome. That's great. I'm glad we have that resource in our area.
We really need it. So I'm excited about it.
Yes,
I
absolutely.
hope we
Well,
I hope we pick up a lot of traction soon.
that would be great. We're just trying to get some awareness too about just doing things a little bit differently around here.
Yeah,
Um, so I
not very
really,
typical.
yes, for sure. I really appreciate the fact that you have kind of stepped into a role that we didn't have anybody in our area, and have really kind of ran with it and trying to just get some education out there and help all these mamas.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. I love it. I have it really I've started to dip my toes in and I know I love the work.
Thank you for listening. May you be encouraged and strengthened by what you've heard today. Remember, you are dearly loved by your Creator, so be who He created you to be. May you go in peace, friends. Till next time, Shalom.